At 2:28 inches the morning on February 1st, 2026, a signal went quiet. A small device, no larger than a matchbook, had been transmitting data from inside a home in the Catalina Foothills neighborhood outside Tucson, Arizona. It had been doing so for years, keeping pace with a heartbeat, recording every beat, every rhythm, every moment of a life still in motion. And then, at 2:28 a.m., it stopped. No one knew yet. No alarm went off. No notification reached any phone. The neighborhood was silent, the desert dark, and the house on the hill looked the same as it had looked every other night for the past 50 years. By the time anyone understood what that silence meant, Nancy Guthrie was already gone. She was 84 years old. She had lived in Tucson since the early 1970s, longer than most of her neighbors had been alive. She was active in her church, known in her community, and by every account, she was not someone who disappeared. She was someone who showed up. Every Sunday, every dinner, every family gathering. She was the kind of woman whose absence is immediately noticed, because her presence had always been guaranteed. And yet, when her family called her that Sunday morning and got no answer, they were not immediately alarmed. When she did not arrive at church, the alarm began. When they went to check on her and found her front door, her car, her wallet, her phone, and her keys all still inside the house, the alarm became something else entirely. Pima County Sheriff Chris Nanos would later say it plainly: she did not walk away from that house. She could not have. She could not walk 50 yards on her own. She relied on daily heart medication. She had a pacemaker, and she had not left voluntarily. The FBI joined the investigation within days. Hundreds of agents, detectives, search and rescue teams, and federal resources poured into Tucson. They canvassed the neighborhood. They reviewed surveillance footage from dozens of homes. They searched the desert terrain for miles in every direction. They deployed technology designed to detect the signal from a pacemaker, scanning coordinates across multiple counties. They found nothing. What they did find was a 41-second clip from a Nest doorbell camera. In it, a figure approaches the front porch of Nancy Guthrie's home at 1:47 inches the morning. The figure is wearing a ski mask, gloves, a black 25-liter Ozark Trail hiker pack. The figure moves with a kind of ease that, according to former FBI profiler Mary Ellen O'Toole, does not look like someone doing this for the first time. The FBI released that footage on February 10th. Within 24 hours, the Pima County tip line received 4,000 calls. None of them led to an arrest. Today, as of the day this video was published, Nancy Guthrie has been missing for more than 50 days. No suspect has been publicly named. No motive has been officially confirmed. And 5 separate retired FBI profilers, each with decades of experience building behavioral profiles of violent offenders, have said the same thing in different ways. This case does not match any pattern they know. That is not a figure of speech. That is a precise, professional assessment from people who have built profiles for the Unabomber, the Zodiac Killer, the Green River Killer, and hundreds of cases that never made national headlines. And when those people say a case defies every known pattern, it is worth asking, what exactly are they seeing? That is what this video is going to answer. If you are new here, Unsolved America covers active investigations and unresolved cases with the same standard of sourcing you would find in a federal briefing, not a true crime forum. If this is the kind of work you want to follow, subscribe now and turn on notifications, because when this case breaks, we will be here. Let us start at the beginning, not with the night she disappeared, but with the life that made what happened possible. Nancy Ellen Long was born on January 27th, 1942, in Fort Wright, Kentucky. She moved to Tucson with her family in the early 1970s and never left. For more than 5 decades, the Catalina Foothills neighborhood was her home. She knew which neighbors had dogs. She knew the layout of the streets. She knew the rhythms of the community in the way that only someone who has lived somewhere for 50 years can know them. By the time she was in her 80s, her world had become smaller in the way that happens to people who age honestly. She relied on daily heart medication. She had a pacemaker implanted to regulate her heartbeat. She had real limitations on her mobility. Sheriff Nanos would confirm this publicly. She was not someone who could simply walk away from her home under her own power. She needed help for basic things. She lived alone. That detail is not meant to reduce her. It is meant to establish something specific. Whoever took Nancy Guthrie knew exactly what they were walking into. They knew her age. They knew her physical condition. They knew she lived alone. They knew the layout of her home and its entrances. They knew her routine. How do we know they knew her routine? Because of an Uber. On the evening of January 31st, Nancy Guthrie ordered an Uber and rode to her daughter Annie Sione's home nearby. She had dinner there. She played games with the family. It was an ordinary evening. Sometime before 10 inches the evening, Annie's husband Tommaso drove Nancy back to her house. She went inside. The lights went on. And then, presumably, she went to bed. There is nothing unusual about that evening. But think about what that evening represents from the outside. A pattern, a schedule. An 4-year-old woman, living alone, returning home at a predictable time, at night, to a house she would not leave again until morning. Someone who had been watching would have found that information useful. The neighborhood where Nancy lived is not a neighborhood you stumble into. The Catalina foothills is a specific community. The homes are set apart, the streets are quiet. A stranger walking those blocks after midnight would have been visible to anyone paying attention. According to multiple law enforcement sources, at least one neighbor reported seeing a suspicious person in the area in the weeks before Nancy disappeared. Investigators returned to that neighbor's home multiple times. They asked specifically about footage captured between January 1st and February 2nd, not just the night of, before. That detail will matter more in a few minutes than it does right now. What matters now is this. Nancy Guthrie went to bed on the night of January 31st in the same house she had lived in for decades. In the same neighborhood she had called home for half a century, with her phone on the nightstand, and her car in the drive, and her whole ordinary life exactly where she had left it. And then the porch camera recorded something. At 1:47 inches the morning on February 1st, 2026, the doorbell camera at the front of Nancy Guthrie's home captured a figure standing on her porch. He was wearing a ski mask that covered his entire face. He wore gloves. He carried a black 25-liter Ozark Trail hiker pack on his back. He was approximately 5 feet 9 to 5 feet 10 inches tall, with an average build. These physical descriptions come directly from the FBI's public release of the footage on February 10th. What he did next was recorded in the 41-second clip the FBI released to the public. He approached the front door. He appeared to examine and then tamper with the Nest doorbell camera mounted at the entrance. The camera captured him in the process of disabling it, but before the feed went dark, it had already recorded everything it needed to record. His movements on that porch are the detail that every profiler who has commented publicly on this case returns to first. Mary Ellen O'Toole spent more than a decade in the FBI's Behavioral Analysis Unit. She worked the Unabomber case. She worked the Zodiac. She has built behavioral profiles of some of the most complex violent offenders in American criminal history. When she watched that 41-second clip, this is what she said. He appears comfortable. He appears used to being there. He is not moving like someone experiencing this situation for the first time. She posed a specific question about the way he was dressed. If you have never done something like this before, she asked, how do you know what to wear? What are you trying to prevent if you have never been in this situation? What have prior experiences taught you? Former FBI profiler Jim Clemente noted something else in that footage. Despite the mask and the gloves, the suspect did not cover his mouth. In Clemente's assessment, that oversight likely means he left DNA evidence at the scene. Clemente also pointed to what appears to be a marking, possibly a tattoo, visible on the suspect's right wrist in the surveillance images. Two things are true at the same time. This person prepared, and this person made mistakes that a truly experienced operator would not make. The FBI would later deploy cadaver dogs, review footage from dozens of surrounding properties, search the desert terrain in multiple counties, and use technology designed to trace the radio signal from a pacemaker. They received thousands of tips. Hundreds of investigators were assigned to the case. The gloves he wore, or a pair matching them, were found in roadside brush, approximately 2 miles from Nancy's home. Investigators extracted a male DNA profile from those gloves. That profile was submitted to the FBI's National DNA Database. It did not match anyone on file. At 2:28 inches the morning, 41 minutes after the doorbell camera was disabled, the monitoring signal from Nancy Guthrie's pacemaker stopped transmitting. That is the last data point anyone has, the last trace of her in any system. A timestamp without an explanation, in a case full of timestamps without explanations. Pima County Sheriff Chris Nanos stood in front of the cameras that morning and said, "We believe she was abducted." He said, "She did not go willingly." He said, "She could not have walked 50 yards on her own." What he did not say, and has not said publicly since, is why. Why this house? Why this woman? Why this night? He has said, in a more recent interview with NBC Nightly News, that investigators believe they know why Nancy Guthrie's home was targeted. He did not say what that reason is. Here is the part of this story that every profiler keeps circling back to, the part that makes this case, in the words of Mary Ellen O'Toole, a very arrogant crime. On February 10th, 9 days after Nancy disappeared, FBI Director Kash Patel posted to social media and announced the release of surveillance images from her Nest doorbell camera. The images showed the suspect on the night of February 1st, masked, gloved, carrying the backpack. But sources familiar with the investigation told ABC News something that did not make the initial headlines. There was a second image. In that second image, the same doorbell camera had captured a figure at Nancy Guthrie's front door on a different date, earlier than February 1st. And in that image, the figure was not carrying the backpack. Read that again. The same figure, the same porch, a different night, before the abduction. Fox News confirmed this through multiple law enforcement sources. The Pima County Sheriff's Department, when asked directly, declined to discuss the specific date, but they publicly asked residents to submit any footage of suspicious activity, suspicious people, or suspicious vehicles captured between January 1st and February 2nd, a month-long window. Neighbor Michelle Young told Fox News that FBI agents and sheriff's investigators came to her home a total of 5 times. On their final visit, she said, they mentioned a specific date, the 11th, as one of the dates they were focused on. A different neighbor said investigators returned repeatedly asking about footage from 2 specific dates before the disappearance. Former FBI profiler James Fitzgerald and his colleague, retired Special Agent Raymond Carr, developed a behavioral profile of the suspect. Their assessment: this individual exhibited what they called fantasy-driven behavior. He would have conducted extensive online research about restraints and surveillance before carrying out the crime. He would have done dry runs on routes to his target. He would have been to that porch before. That is not speculation. That is what the second doorbell image appears to confirm. The suspect came to Nancy Guthrie's home at least twice before she disappeared. On the first documented visit, he came without the backpack. On the night of February 1st, he came prepared. What happened during the first visit? What was he doing on her porch without the bag? Did he go inside? Did he make contact with her? Were there other visits not captured on camera? None of those questions have been answered publicly. What has been answered is this: the FBI now believes the abduction was planned, not impulsive, not opportunistic. Planned, researched, rehearsed. And that raises a question that cuts to the center of everything else in this investigation. If someone spent weeks planning this crime, learning this woman's schedule, visiting her home more than once, preparing with a level of precision that multiple experienced profilers describe as uncommon for this type of offense, then this was never random. This was never about an elderly woman who happened to be vulnerable and happened to live alone. This was about Nancy Guthrie specifically, or it was about someone connected to her. The FBI has doubled its reward to $100,000. The Guthrie family is offering $1 million for information leading to her recovery. The Pima County tip line has received thousands of calls. Hundreds of investigators are working the case around the clock. And yet, as of today, no arrest has been made. No suspect has been publicly named. And the question of why this house and this woman remains officially unanswered? If you have doorbell, dash cam, or any camera footage from the Catalina Foothills area captured between January 1st and February 2nd, 2026, the FBI is asking you to come forward. The tip line is 1800CALLFBI. That number will be in the description below. The scale of what law enforcement has deployed in this case is not something that happens quietly. Within days of Nancy's disappearance, the FBI had joined a multi-agency investigation that would eventually include Customs and Border Protection, search and rescue teams, and hundreds of personnel covering terrain that stretches far beyond the Catalina foothills. Fabian Pacheco, Chief of Detectives for the Pima County Attorney's Office, told CBS News that of the thousands of tips received, approximately 10% had investigative value. One tip, he said, is all it takes. One lead to break the case open. That lead has not come yet, but the investigation has not stood still. On February 10th, the FBI released the doorbell camera footage and images to the public. Within 24 hours, the Pima County tip line received 4,000 calls. Spokesperson Angelica Carrillo confirmed that surge publicly, while noting that not all of those calls were directly connected to the Guthrie case. From the physical scene, investigators had already collected significant material. Bloodstains found at the front entrance and inside the home were confirmed to be Nancy's. Her purse, wallet, phone, and vehicle were left behind. There were no signs of a large-scale physical struggle. That last detail matters to the profilers. It means either the encounter was controlled from the very beginning, or Nancy was unable to resist in a way that would leave visible marks. Given her physical condition, given her age, given the limitations on her mobility that the sheriff confirmed publicly, the latter is a clinical reality. Approximately 2 miles from the house, in roadside brush, investigators found a glove. The glove appeared to match, in type and general description, the gloves the suspect was wearing in the doorbell camera footage. A male DNA profile was extracted from that glove. The Pima County Sheriff's Department sent it to a laboratory and submitted it to the FBI's National DNA Database. As of this recording, no match has been found. According to NBC Nightly News, investigators also recovered what has been described as mixed DNA from inside Nancy's home. That sample is being analyzed. Because this detail comes from a single-sourced report and has not been independently confirmed by a second outlet, it should be noted as reported but not yet verified. The FBI also deployed technology to search for Nancy's pacemaker signal. Blue fly detection equipment was brought in, capable of tracking the specific radio frequency that pacemaker monitors transmit. Ground search teams were dispatched to coordinates in neighboring counties based on cell tower data. None of those searches produced results connected to Nancy. In late February, the FBI shifted its primary command post from Tucson to Phoenix, a logistical adjustment that officials described as increasing efficiency without reducing the local investigation. Agents remained on the ground in Tucson, working alongside Pima County detectives. Additional camera footage has been recovered from Nancy's property in recent weeks. Thumbnail images from motion-activated cameras that covered the pool, the backyard, and the side yard. No video was recovered from these cameras, only still images. According to sources briefed on the investigation and reported by ABC News, those images captured people in the yard area during an unspecified period before the abduction, but nothing in the images appeared suspicious. Crucially, the cameras did not record anything on the night of February 1st. The ransom communications add a separate layer of complexity to an already layered investigation. At least 3 separate ransom-related communications have been reported. The first was a letter received by KOLD-TV, a local CBS affiliate in Tucson, on February 2nd. That letter reportedly contained specific details about Nancy's home and what she was wearing on the night she disappeared. Investigators reviewed it, took it seriously, and shared it with the FBI, though they declined to publicly confirm whether it was sent by whoever was holding her. A second communication demanded $6 million in Bitcoin and included a deadline of 5 p.m. on February 9th. Savannah Guthrie and her siblings posted a video on February 7th, addressing directly whoever was responsible, saying they had received the message and would pay. February 9th came and went. No payment was publicly confirmed. No follow-up contact was reported. On February 5th, a California man was arrested on federal charges for posing as Nancy's abductor and demanding ransom from the family. Authorities were explicit. His scheme was entirely separate from the other ransom communications that had already received wide coverage. Mary Ellen O'Toole articulated it plainly in an interview with Wavy News. She holds 2 theories about the ransom notes simultaneously. Either they were written by the person or persons holding Nancy, or they were not. Both tracks are being followed at the same time. Until one is eliminated, neither can be. Former FBI Special Agent Harry Trombitas told Yahoo News that ransom as the primary motive is appearing less and less likely. His reasoning: there are too many ways to get caught in a ransom scenario involving cryptocurrency and federal surveillance. A sophisticated actor, he suggested, would know that. If it is not ransom, the investigation shifts to something harder to define, harder to track, and in some ways harder to prosecute. That is where the case stands today. Forensically active, investigatively open, and publicly unresolved. There is a phrase that comes up in almost every public statement from the investigators working this case. The phrase is, We believe she was targeted. Not random. Not opportunistic. Targeted. Sheriff Nanos has said it. The FBI's public communications have implied it. Every profiler who has analyzed the surveillance footage has independently arrived at the same conclusion. And yet, targeted by whom, and for what reason, remains the central unanswered question of an investigation that has now stretched past 7 weeks with no arrest, no named suspect, and no publicly confirmed motive. What makes that silence unusual is not the absence of information. Investigators regularly withhold details to protect an active probe. What makes it unusual is the combination of things that do not fit together when you lay them side by side. Consider what is confirmed. The suspect planned this crime across multiple visits. He researched his target. He understood the physical layout of her property well enough to approach and tamper with her doorbell camera in under a minute. He dressed specifically to counter forensic recovery. He carried equipment. Now consider what the profilers observed in the same footage. He did not cover his mouth. He appears to have exposed a marking on his wrist. He left physical evidence in the surrounding area. He created a paper trail through ransom communications that federal investigators were able to analyze and partially trace. Former FBI profiler James Fitzgerald made this point precisely when he described the pressure the suspect was likely feeling in the weeks after the crime became national news. Someone who planned this carefully, Fitzgerald said, is now aware that every behavioral change they make is a potential tell. They may be over-explaining their whereabouts, creating alibis no one asked for, cleaning their vehicle far more thoroughly than they normally would, avoiding locations they used to frequent, watching police activity with an intensity that people around them might notice. That behavioral signature, Fitzgerald noted, is how cases like this eventually break, not through a single dramatic piece of forensic evidence, but through the accumulation of small observations made by people who know the suspect and begin to recognize a change. Which raises a question the investigation has not addressed publicly. Who knows this person? The behavioral profile developed by Fitzgerald and his colleague Raymond Carr describes an individual with fantasy-driven tendencies who would have spent significant time researching this crime before committing it. Online research into restraints, research into surveillance systems, research into routes. This is not someone who acted on sudden impulse. This is someone who spent time inside their own head building a version of this crime before they ever stepped onto that porch. Dr. Ann Burgess, who spent decades helping develop the FBI's foundational approach to criminal profiling, offered a different angle on the same question. In her assessment, expressed on the Surviving the Survivor podcast, the crime appears personal. The suspect did not choose the most efficient point of entry into the residence. He came to the front door. That choice, in Burgess's reading, suggests a desire for direct engagement rather than simple access. It suggests the door itself, or the person behind it, held some specific meaning. She also raised a question that no profiler has been able to definitively answer. Nothing in Nancy Guthrie's own background, as far as publicly available information reveals, marks her as an obvious target for this kind of crime. She was not a public figure. She was not wealthy in a way that would have made a ransom plausible to a calculated criminal. She was an 4-year-old woman who went to church and had dinner with her daughter and lived in the same neighborhood for half a century. But her daughter is Savannah Guthrie, one of the most recognizable faces in American television journalism, a woman whose professional visibility is both national and continuous. Burgess posed the question carefully: who is this going to affect the most? She did not answer it. She noted that it is the kind of question investigators must hold open alongside every other theory, because at this stage, eliminating it would require evidence that does not yet exist publicly. Mary Ellen O'Toole has been equally careful about drawing conclusions in that direction. In her interview with Wavy News, she named 2 distinct possibilities for why Nancy was targeted: because she was Savannah Guthrie's mother, or because she was an 4-year-old woman living alone with a pacemaker and limited mobility. Both possibilities, she said, must remain open. The victimology does not yet resolve cleanly in either direction. That is the valley this investigation is sitting in. Not a lack of evidence, but an abundance of evidence that has not yet resolved into a single coherent explanation. Former FBI agent Harry Trombitas told Yahoo News that ransom as a primary driver is appearing less likely with each passing week. Too many variables, too many exposure points for a sophisticated actor to risk. And yet the ransom communications contain details about Nancy's home and clothing that only someone with direct knowledge of the situation could have known. Either someone with direct knowledge sent those notes, or someone with direct knowledge spoke to the person who did. The sheriff has confirmed publicly that investigators believe they know why the house was targeted. He has said this clearly in a national television interview and declined to say more. That gap between what investigators believe and what they have chosen to make public is not unusual in active cases. It is, in fact, standard practice. Information withheld now can be used to verify tips, identify false confessions, and close investigative loops that public disclosure would permanently compromise. But it means that everyone outside the investigation, including the profilers speaking publicly, including the family, including the thousands of people who have sent tips and followed every update, is working from an incomplete picture. And the incomplete picture has 5 different profilers pointing in 5 slightly different directions. That is not a failure of the investigation. It is a measure of how carefully this crime was constructed. The 5 profilers who have commented publicly on this case represent a combined century of experience analyzing violent crime. Mary Ellen O'Toole worked the Unabomber in the Zodiac. James Fitzgerald cracked the Unabomber linguistically. Ann Burgess helped build the FBI's behavioral science methodology from the ground up. Jim Clemente and Candace DeLong each spent careers inside the most complex criminal investigations in American history. And when those 5 people look at the same 41 seconds of footage and the same set of known facts, they do not arrive at the same conclusion. O'Toole sees a true psychopath, someone whose anxiety level under extreme circumstances registers as near zero, someone who moved through a violent crime with the casual affect of a person running an errand. Burgess sees a personal motive, someone for whom the front door of that specific house carried weight, someone who was not simply looking for a target, but for that target. Fitzgerald sees a planner, someone who had constructed this scenario in detail long before executing it, someone whose behavior in the weeks after would be marked by the specific stress signatures of a person trying to maintain a performance. Clemente sees the mistakes, the uncovered mouth, the exposed wrist, the discarded evidence 2 miles from the scene, the forensic trail of someone who prepared extensively but could not anticipate every variable. DeLong sees experience, not a first offense, not a young person testing a theory, but someone who has been inside other people's homes before, who has committed other crimes, who arrived at this one with a learned comfort in transgression. 5 readings of the same crime, 5 different windows into the same unknown. What they agree on is this. This is not a crime that fits a familiar category. Ransom kidnappings of elderly women are not a recognized pattern in American criminal history. The FBI's own data reflects this. Cases involving female victims over the age of 80 account for fewer than 0.2% of 1% of all kidnapping and abduction cases tracked by federal law enforcement. That number is not just a statistic. It is an explanation for why the profilers are struggling. They are building a profile of a behavior that has almost no precedent to compare against. The frameworks they normally use were built on patterns. This case, by definition, sits outside those patterns. That is what the phrase defies every known pattern actually means when professionals use it. It does not mean the case is mysterious in a narrative sense. It means the analytical tools designed to generate leads are operating in territory they were not built for. And, in that territory, the investigation depends more heavily on what it always depends on in the end. Someone who knows something, deciding to say it. The reward stands at $100,000 from the FBI. The Guthrie family has offered $1 million. Anonymous tips are accepted at 8 crime. The FBI line is open around the clock. 7 weeks in, the investigation is still moving. The forensic evidence is still being processed. The surveillance images recovered from cameras across the neighborhood are still being analyzed. Investigators are still knocking on doors in the Catalina foothills, still asking about dates in January, still looking for the piece that completes the picture. Nancy Guthrie has been missing since February 1st. She relies on heart medication she has not had access to since that night. She was 84 years old when she disappeared, 4 days after her birthday. Her family has not stopped. Savannah Guthrie suspended her broadcasting work, including coverage of the Winter Olympics, to be present for the search. Her siblings, Annie and Cameron, have been with her throughout. In a video message posted in early February, the 3 of them addressed whoever was responsible directly, saying they had received the message and were ready to listen, ready to respond, ready to bring their mother home. Savannah Guthrie said her mother's heart is fragile. She asked for proof of life. She said her family needed to know without any doubt that Nancy was alive. That proof has not come. The community in Tucson has kept a visible presence outside the house on the hill. Flowers, notes, rocks left by neighbors who did not know Nancy personally but understood what her disappearance meant to everyone around them. The yellow flowers have been growing in number for weeks. The Pima County Sheriff's Department continues to process forensic material. The FBI continues to analyze camera images from around the property and from the broader neighborhood. Cell tower data from surrounding counties has been reviewed. Known persons of interest have been interviewed. At least 2 men were detained and released without charges. The California man who fabricated a ransom demand has been federally charged, and his case is entirely separate. What the investigation has not produced, as of this recording, is a named suspect in the abduction itself. No arrest, no public identification, no confirmation of the motive that Sheriff Nanos says his investigators believe they understand. The last confirmed signal from Nancy Guthrie was a data transmission from a small device keeping track of her heartbeat. It stopped at 2:28 inches the morning on February 1st, 2026. Everything since then has been the work of hundreds of investigators trying to find out what the silence after that signal means. There are things this case can teach us that go beyond what happened on one street in Tucson on one February morning. The first is behavioral. Fitzgerald's profile of the suspect's post-crime behavior describes a specific set of observable changes. Appearing mentally strained in ways that are new, calling in sick or withdrawing from routines without explanation, offering unsolicited accounts of where they were, cleaning their vehicle or home with unusual intensity, disposing of bags or clothing, becoming hypervigilant around law enforcement activity in ways that stand out to people who know them. These are not theoretical signs. They are documented behavioral signatures from profilers who have studied dozens of cases involving planned abductions. If someone in your life changed in these specific ways beginning in early February, that change is worth reporting. The second is systemic. What this case reveals about behavioral profiling and active investigations is that the tool has real limits when a crime falls outside established categories. 5 experienced profilers, each with decades of federal work behind them, have produced 5 different readings of the same evidence. That divergence is not a failure of the individuals. It reflects a structural gap in the analytical frameworks law enforcement has built. Those frameworks were designed around patterns. When a crime is constructed to sit outside patterns, the investigation becomes more dependent on physical evidence and community knowledge than on behavioral inference. That is a limitation worth understanding, not because it is reassuring, but because it explains why cases like this one move differently and why the public role in generating tips carries more weight than it would in a more categorically familiar crime. Nancy Guthrie turned 84 years old on January 27th, 2026. 4 days later, she ordered an Uber, went to her daughter's house for dinner, came home, and went to bed. Her purse is still where she left it. Her car is still in the drive. The investigation is in its 7th week with no arrest. The forensic evidence is still being processed. The surveillance analysis continues. And the sheriff believes he knows why that house was chosen, but has not said. Sheriff Nanos has also said something else, something that did not get as much attention as the reward figures in the footage release. He said the person or persons responsible could strike again. He did not elaborate. He did not explain what that assessment is based on. He did not say who else might be at risk, or what the connection might be between a potential future target and what happened to Nancy Guthrie. But a law enforcement official does not make that statement publicly without a reason. What the investigators believe about this case, the part they are not yet saying out loud, may be the most important part of all. Unsolved America will be here when it becomes public. If you want to follow this case as it develops, subscribe now. The tip line is 1800CALLFBI. The description has every contact number you need. And if the sheriff is right, if the motive behind this crime connects to something larger than one woman in one house, on one night, then this is not the last time we will be talking about it.